Hey y'all, welcome to the Clock Tower. I'm Colton, here with Brandon. Not much to talk about for once this week. We just have a couple of regional events to go over, but other than that, not a whole lot has been going on. Shot Challenge schedule has been ramping up, so a lot of those took place this last weekend. Some more will take place this weekend. But as far as regional competition, we just had the two tournaments. The second and third events on the schedule, we will start with Taiwan, which took place on Saturday, September 3rd. 30 players at this one. Taiwan is always a weird regional because it's smaller and the sets that get played are very local meta dependent, which is why we see 4 Tokyo Revengers decks in top 8, none of which are the dual laners list, at least as far as we know. Danmachi, the meta list, Salvage into Pants, took first, and then 3 Tokyo Revengers decks to round out top 4, then another Tokyo Revengers, a pair of quintuplets, and a Beaufry in top 8. Brandon, looking at this set of results, is there anything that we take away from this at all? Or, obviously, congratulations to the folks who won and topped, but in terms of preparing for a tournament that's probably going to be very different than this field, what do you notice out of these results?
I think it's interesting that, especially because this is opening weekend for Quince, right? Quince 2 has now entered the scene this weekend, and that's the first weekend it's available for tournament play, that we see Quince in top 8 of the 30 people that played. So Quince had made it out there and was playable and playing in the tournament. So I think that's definitely worthwhile and worth noting that 1/4 of top 8 was Quince.
Next, the Georgia Regional in the United States took place the next day. 72 players, so a bigger tournament overall, and a little more of what we would expect at a meta-heavy tournament. 8 Standby Quince takes it home, followed by Kanata Marin. Adventure Time Standby Choice finishes third and gets the invite to Worlds, followed by 8 Standby Quince in fourth, and then rounding out top 8, 8 Choice Slime, Okayo Kanata Marin Hololive, Salvage Pants Danmachi, and 8 Standby Quintuplets. So 3 quintuplets in top 8, like you said, that first weekend. Quintuplets basically just pushing MTI right out of top 8, just basically taking the spots that it had in the Houston Regional. And then beyond that, it's very much what you would expect, with the exception of this Adventure Time list. Standby into Choice has kind of been cast aside by most people, and frankly myself included. I didn't give it a whole lot of praise going into the season, that's for sure. Do you think that this matters, or is this just a one-off thing?
I think it's a really interesting deck, partly because you have the explosive top end, right? The deck that's going to try to stick damage and more often than not stick that damage that it needs to do. It has a lot of tools to be able to respond to different deck states. Standby to help try to pump out additional soul earlier through bigger bodies. I think the biggest part that's what gives it a little more interesting staying power here is the 2-1 event, the Demon Bloodsword event, that you can return characters to your opponent's hand. So especially when playing into Standby, you can remove Standby targets starting at level 2 back to their hand, forcing them to either pay the stock to play them down again, or potentially if they played it down too early, they're now stuck with cards in hand they can't play, or be difficult to get rid of to get back on stage. I think it's a relatively interesting matchup into some of those things because it makes it more difficult to play them.
Yeah, it's trying to deal with Standby specifically, right, in the way that, kind of like Beaufry does, in a way. Like, it's not to that extent, but it's trying to play into recognizing what meta it's in. Like, it's got that 1/1 Adachi in there. It's got the event that bounces. It's got Power Pump. It has all these extra pieces to intentionally try to deal with Standby specifically. The Memory Kick back row is really powerful as well in that context. And I think that if you can pair an effective anti-standby package with what is still one of the most effective closing top ends in the English game, I think there's something here. I don't think that we're going to see a ton of this going forward. Like, I think this is probably the only time Adventure Time is going to get a Worlds invite, but it's at least interesting, and I can see this catching someone off guard in Swiss for sure. So it might be something to keep an eye on if you're preparing to go to an event in the next few weeks. As far as the rest of top 8 is concerned, 2 more Hololives, one of which is just your, kind of standard Kanata Marine, the other of which is playing the bar level 1 into the Kanata package. Haven't seen this much before, but obviously it worked well enough to go top 8. Do you think there's something here? Do you think this is potentially something that we could see more of going forward, or is this a one-off kind of thing?
I think this is more of a one-off thing because I think this is more of one person's attempts to try to be able to recur combo more efficiently. With Bar being able to, when you trigger, bounce to hand, you can then trade out that Climax with Climax swapped for the stock soul that you need for the Kanata, or trade it in for the Climax you need for the Marine. Like, you have that Climax assurance in a way by triggering as many bars as possible. And it also gives a little bit more of a game plan for that level 1 game. Whereas typical Kanata Marine builds we've seen try to just survive.
Right.
Or push to get up to 2. So your Kanatas can come down and dominate board and go from there.
Yeah, instead of playing the level 1 Miko that has hand-on core to just try to keep a board until they get to 2, they're actually trying to hit a combo that not only pluses them, but has like decent selectivity because it's top chick 3 add anything. So you can actually add your stock soul off of this. So it gives you a little bit more access to that stock soul. And it only plays 1 salvage at the top. It's trying to lean really hard into making sure that it gets its only stock swap. Either that or it plans on drawing into it with the Marine. So super interesting Climax distribution. This looks like the kind of thing that someone like worked very hard on at their locals and like tested and tested and tested and then refined and said, I think I have something here. And they were right. They do have something here. This is, at the very least, it's interesting. I don't know if this is going to affect the way that people will play this list going forward, but at the very least, it's an interesting take on an established archetype, and obviously it works. So, good on them for experimenting with something that, earned a top 8. The other thing that I think is interesting here that we haven't talked about yet is the 8-choice slime list in top 8. Slime kind of didn't have a great rumble, and it's been really quiet in the past couple of months, but here we are, top 8. 8-choice slime, it's the fake restander Rimuru that just kind of keeps replenishing stock and trying to swing over and over and over again until your opponent dies. What do you think this list potentially brings to the table in a regional setting? Because you are like the channel's resident slime player, so you know this set really well. What do you think when you see this list?
I think it has that similar idea, like what we said with Adventure Time, that kind of idea of the explosive top end. Like, this is going to be probably the bigger damage output that Slime has as a top end. So just kind of having that available to it and trying to just deal as much damage as possible. And then tries to sustain and tries to kind of work its way through, build up the stock that it needs for it, get the hand size it needs for it. Like, one thing that we've seen, especially with Slime, despite its many varied builds, was it was like a consistency, right? That the floor of Slime is pretty high. But I think that what we've seen, especially over the past couple events where we haven't seen Slime top an event, it doesn't necessarily have the high ceiling that you would want a deck to have to try to close out those games. That its potential seems to be limited, but it's very consistent in what it does.
Yeah, and I think that's why they run this Rimuru top end, right? Because this is the closest thing that Slime has to a truly explosive top end, trying to just recur attackers over and over and over again. I've seen this go off. I've seen, this deck get 7 attacks at level 3. And when it does, it's nuts. It's actually insane. So,
well, and I think that the player running it especially saw some consistency with this deck as well, playing this both at Rumble and getting into the top 8, as well as now in Georgia as well. So I think being able to see that top multiple events with the same deck, I think is really important to note too. Also worth noting that the representation for Slime was also rather low at Georgia. So the fact that Slime was able to get into top 8 with a very small representation should also say something about that as well.
Yeah, and this is something that we talked about um, in the, I think it was in the post Rumble wrap up with Darcy, how we're at the point now with things like Slime where it's kind of in the Love Live Sunshine zone in terms of like the life cycle of a set. It's at the point where you have this handful of true believers who still think the set is playable in a meta context, who have put the most hours into it, who have played the most games with it, who have given it the most attention. And when you give a good set to a good player and give them hundreds of hours with it, they're going to come out with something. And I think that's where Slime kind of is. It's not top tier, but it has enough pieces so that a good player who puts the work in can have a Slime list that is not only competent, but capable of really good results, such as this top 8 we saw in Georgia. And that's all we've got. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back on Thursday with 5 cards, 5 minutes. Next Tuesday, I believe you have a deck tech, Brandon, and then we'll have gameplay for that the following Thursday. And in 2 weeks, another Clock Talk. We're talking about Chicago. That's the one that we're going to be at. So hopefully it goes well. Until next time, thank you so much for joining us. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and have a good one.
We'll see you then.